In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the rear inner axle seal on this Dodge Ram 2500. It's located on your rear wheel hub, so we'll have to remove that, of course. So let's get started. For this job, we will be draining some differential gear oil out of this differential. So you want to make sure you can fill it back up with a 3/8 drive ratchet. Make sure your drain plug breaks free. You don't have to remove it at this time. This one breaks free, so we're good to continue. If yours does not, I recommend getting this to come off first before you start draining so you can fill it back up when you're done. If your vehicle has these covers on the lug nuts, take them off with a pry bar. Be careful not to scratch the wheel. Once you pull this off, you can take all of your 24mm lug nuts off. With those off, remove the wheel. With a 21mm socket, remove the 2 bolts that hold the caliper and bracket assembly onto the rear axle. This one's off, but I will thread it back in a couple turns so that it can hold the caliper for me while I remove the bottom one. Remove the bottom. Take the top one off. Once you take it off, be careful because the caliper is fairly heavy. It'll come off with the pads and everything, and you definitely do not want to let it hang on that brake hose. So what I'm going to do is flip it over like this and jam it right between the shock absorber and the differential, just like so. And for safety, I will be using a bungee cord to strap it here. That way it doesn't come off. I don't want to put any pressure on that brake hose, because if I do, it can damage it. Next, you're going to want to remove the rotor. Sometimes it gets stuck. If it's on the face of the hub, you can hit it with a hammer. Or if it's the parking brake shoes, you're going to want to work it back and forth and loosen them up. This one is not that stuck. It is moving, so I'll just have to work it sideways, up and down, and slide it off. There it is. So obviously we have some issues here with the backing shield. I'm going to fix that, but usually there's a pin holding this up. It would stay like this. If it was still held on, you'd want to pry it aside, get the adjuster out from the top. There it is. And that should release pressure off of the top spring. There's that. At which point you would still have the shoe attached on the backing shield with that pin. Mine is no longer here on this side, so I can show you how to do it on the other side. That spring just fell out, so this shoe is ready to go. So let's move to the other side and take it off of that pin. So here's what the pin and the spring is supposed to look like. If you use the hub as a leverage point, you should be able to pry this from the back side, spin the pin. There we go. Remove the pin. This shoe should also be free to go now. And obviously this is supposed to come out the back side, but I'm going to remove it this way and obviously replace that backing shield. Now you can pry these apart, and that should allow you to remove them off the bottom. This spring comes out if you just twist the shoes like this. All of my hardware is surprisingly in reusable condition. It looks like it's somewhat new here, so I'm going to reuse it. But if you have rusted hardware and you cannot reuse them, definitely replace all these springs, the pins, and everything. Now I'm going to use a 9/16 socket. You can use a 15mm, but it's a little bit loose. But if that's all you have, it'll do the job. Remove all of these bolts, and then we're going to have to pull the axle shaft off of the hub to then free up the hub and get to the backing plate / backing shield. As you can see, these have a lot of thread locker on them, so they do get pretty tight. And now, if you have a rubber mallet, you can just tap the axle. That should break it free. Oil will come out, so make sure you have a collection bucket ready to catch it. And also, I recommend having a rag ready because the axle is covered in oil, and pull it straight out. There it is. Now let's take a pick and remove this snap ring. This is just here to prevent the pin that's here from coming out. And then with a magnet, I'm going to remove said pin. Keep all of this safe. At this point, what I'm going to do is count the amount of threads that are here. For me, it looks like it's 3 threads that I can see, so that when I put it back, I at least have a reference of how much the axle nut is going back on. Of course, I will feel it out, so I'm going to show you exactly how to do that, but I want a baseline reference of how far to go to start with. So 3 threads for me might not be the same for you. Remove this mounting nut that holds the hub on. Keep this safe as well. It can only go on one way, as you can see. If you move the hub around, you should be able to get the outer bearing out of here. You know, you can just grab all of your tools with the magnet. You can also get a magnet and slide this out, just like this. Inspect it. This one is perfectly fine, so I'm going to reuse it. I'll set it aside in a clean area. To get this hub off, you may need a pry bar to pry on the back side. I'm going to try to just wiggle it first and pull. That might not work though. Okay, broke the seal on one side. There we go. Remove the hub. Let the hub drain into your collection bucket, and I will be replacing this seal, not just because it leaks, but you should be replacing it anytime you take it off. To remove this old seal, you could do it a few different ways. I'm going to take a chisel and a hammer, and the lip here that sits on the hub, I'm just going to pop it up. There it is. Take it off. I'm going to take a clean rag and get this area wiped down, especially if any debris fell into the bearing here. This bearing feels great. Not that I was making any noise before, but it's always good to inspect these since you're in here. And I'm going to wipe down the side. Now take the new seal and line it up. When you tap this down, you can use a piece of wood, which is what I'm going to start with, unless you have a large seal driver that's about this big, because you don't want to hit on the inner surface right here where the rubber is, only on the outside. And the problem with doing this with just a hammer is, well, first of all, if it's a steel hammer, careful not to bend it, but also it's easy to basically lean it to one side, drive it in on one side, and then it's not going to be even all around. So try to keep it even all the way around. Using this piece of wood and a rubber mallet, I'm going to drive it down carefully. It's looking good. All right. It's perfectly seated, and there you have it. That's installed. Let's install the hub carefully with the new seal so that you don't damage it. And once it gets to the end here, you're going to have to push it on. There we go. You can hear that click. Install the outer bearing. Make sure you put it in the right direction, of course. There we go. On top of that will go the nut, this larger axle nut that secures it all. You might have to wiggle it around a little bit, spin it counterclockwise to find that first thread. once you do, it'll catch on and it should thread on smoothly, but often it gets kind of stuck like this if you're off of the thread. There it is. Okay, so right there, it's pretty much bottomed out. What I'm gonna do at this point is I'm going to tighten it a little bit extra. Obviously, if you have the proper socket for this, use that. I don't, so I'm just gonna do it this way. Tighten it a little bit extra, make it snug. You'll see that this feels like it has resistance on it. That's normal. You're trying to seat those bearings. Give it a little more. A couple more spins. The reason you want to make this tighter and tighter until it can't go anymore is to seat the bearings properly. And it looks like they are seated. Counting the threads, I have exactly 3 threads here, which is what I had when I started. So the notch here, this cutout, is going to have to line up with the one on the axle tube. That's how I'm going to have to lock it in. And if I back it off like this and feel it out, this feels perfect. It doesn't roll forever and ever. It doesn't have play, but it's also not very tight. Like, I don't need a lot of force to spin it. If you need force to spin it, it is over tightened and you will wear out your bearings prematurely. This feels nice and free spinning, but obviously not too much. Now, once you have this axle nut set, slide this in, and only then can you lock it in with this locking clip. Slide it all the way around. If it's not sitting on the thread that you want it to sit, just push it on with a tool, go all around, make sure it is locked in place. Perfect. At this point, let's clean up this mating surface so we can put the axle shaft back in. Part of the original gasket is stuck to the face of the hub for me, so I'm going to peel it off. Sometimes RTV is used here, which is what I will use, but if you already have it, then scrape it all off with a razor blade, or if you have any corrosion going on. My surface is actually in really good condition. It's perfectly clean, so there's not much to clean for me. The only thing I will do is take a blowgun and blow all of these holes out. I don't want oils, debris, or old thread locker in there, so I'm just going to clear them out, and then we can install the axle. On the axle shaft, you'll find the rest of your seal if you had one of these. Scrape that off and scrape off the rest of it. Make sure it's going to be a nice, flat, smooth surface. Sometimes, like I said, these build up corrosion, so you'll have to sand it down at that point. Just don't sand down too much. And once it's all cleaned up, take a rag, wipe it off, and then on the clean side of the rag, apply brake parts cleaner. You want to degrease the surface because we will be applying RTV to it to seal it up, unless you have another one of these paper gaskets. But with RTV, you can't have oil on it, otherwise it won't stick. So, gotta degrease it. And we'll do the same to the hub side. Right before applying RTV, degrease it with brake parts cleaner. This should be good to go. Like I said, do the same on the hub side. I'm going to degrease it so I can use RTV. Perfect. Having said that, apply a very, very thin layer of RTV. You don't need a lot. You just need enough to create a nice, tight seal. Once you have it all evened out, let's get ready to put the axle shaft back in. If you have too much, wipe it off with a clean glove and even it out. If you don't have enough, add some. Try not to get it inside of the threads though. These are the bolts that hold the axle shaft onto the hub. I cleaned them up in a wire wheel, removed all of the old thread locker, degreased them, and applied brand new red thread locker. I recommend you do the same. Anything that spins like this, drive shaft, axle shaft, should get thread locker. Install the axle shaft slowly and carefully. Try not to drag it along the differential. And then once you get to the end, you'll have to, I'm trying not to grab the inside here, you'll have to kind of lift it up and wiggle it and spin it so it can fall into its splines on the differential side. My bolts actually happen to line up perfectly, so I'm going to start in the bolts. I'm going to do 2 across from each other. That should hold it in position, and then I can start in the rest. There we go. Snug them up. Don't tighten them too much yet. I just want to snug them first, go in a cross pattern. All right, we'll let this RTV set for a few minutes and then we'll come back and torque them. I have a pry bar through the lug studs. Make sure it's flat so that it doesn't damage the threads on the lug studs, and this is what's going to hold the hub from spinning so that I can actually torque these. I'm going to torque them in a cross pattern, one at a time. 98 foot-pounds is the torque. I'm going to mark the ones I torqued with a yellow crayon, that way I know what I've done so far. Okay, that was the last one. However, I will go around one more time just to double check them all. That's it, they're all tight. Before we continue, let's add a little bit of silicone paste or brake grease, whatever you're using for your brake grease, onto the little raised areas of the backing shield, as well as down here where the shoes ride. This is going to prevent squeaking from happening as the brakes operate, or the shoes operate when you engage the parking brake. And you're going to want to do this to both sides. Don't put a lot on. If you put too much, it's actually going to just melt and kind of get all over here. You should be using high temperature rated grease anyway, but you know, if you do actually put too much, it will run down. Having said that, let's get the shoes on. Get the new shoes, and if you have new hardware, mine is, like I said, in good condition, so I'm reusing it. As you can see, the curve on the end of the spring follows the curve of the shoe, so you want to put it on that way, not the other way. I'm not even going to go in the other way. Swoop it in into that cutout at the bottom and lay it down flat. On the back side, this is what it should look like. Like I said, it'll follow the curvature of the shoe. Take the other shoe and slide it in the same way. This is what you'll end up with, and you have to put the spring on before you put the shoes on, otherwise you'll never get the shoes or the spring onto the vehicle. Having said that, I'm going to basically spread them apart now and clamp them over the backing plate here. All right, so I have one of them. I have this one lined up on this side. I'm going to leave them like this, and I will lock this shoe in with its locking pin so that it can stay on to the backing shield. That way I can then use a pry bar on the other one and get it up into place. I'm going to install a C-clamp here to hold the shoe for me. If you just can't get it to line up, this is going to be your next best option if you have one. Don't make it too tight, just a little snug, just enough to hold it in position, and then get that pin through. Get the spring on. Try to pry the spring. Okay, I got it through. Try to twist it to lock it in. It's not fully set yet, as you can see. It has to go 90 degrees, but there we go. That's in. Release the clamp. The shoe should stay in place. Perfect. Now with this shoe clamped on tight, can't go anywhere, so we can grab onto this one. We have to pull it out, up, and back in, just so it can hook onto that parking brake lever, or the pivot point down there. That's all that's missing at this point. So this is what you're looking for on the bottom. When you're done, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is that pivot for the parking brake. It's supposed to be hooked onto both sides. Right here, the shoes have a cutout. And on the base, where the parking brake shoes actually sit, they're supposed to be flush and basically locked into their cutouts here. Once again, if it doesn't look like this, take it back off or fix whatever needs to be fixed. Otherwise, these will not operate properly. Might even get stuck between the rotor and the shoe. I'm going to choose to use the C-clamp on this side as well, mostly because it'll give me an advantage. I'll be able to hold everything a lot better and install it a lot quicker. This side you can actually hold with one hand, so if you don't have the C-clamp, it should be easier, but the C-clamp still makes things a whole lot easier. So I'm going to use it. Now if you have a large set of locking pliers, that would work as well, like welders locking pliers maybe. But whatever you can use to hold this shoe in place should benefit. Remember not to make it very tight, just snug enough to not move it, otherwise you'll start bending things. Slide the pin through and the spring. Press on the spring. Try to twist the head of that pin. Now, keep in mind, if you actually pry on it or twist it too much, you can snap the head off and then it won't lock in. You'll need a new pin. This is fully locked in though, so I can release my C-clamp. And the shoe should stay in place. There it is. At the top, let's put this spring in. It has two little holes. It's the only holes at the top. Just hook it in and make sure it's not going to fall out. And the adjuster goes in next. This one is covered in grease already from the previous person that serviced it, so that's great. I'm going to leave it. A lot of times this gets seized up in here and this little cogwheel won't spin anymore. Try to unseize it, lubricate it with high temperature brake grease or silicone paste, whatever you're using. And then you'll see these large cutouts here. That's where the adjuster has to go in. So I'm going to have to start it in by hand, and then I'm going to grab a pry bar, pry this open, and get the adjuster in. You can also use a screwdriver if that's what you have on hand. There we go. As long as the adjuster is collapsed all the way, threaded in, it shouldn't be that difficult to get it locked in here. Take the parking brake cable, hook it into the parking brake adjuster or pivot lever here on the bottom. Make sure it hooks in like that. And to get this spring pushed back, what I like to do is grab some locking pliers. Obviously don't completely crush it, but if you just pinch it like that, when you pull it towards the bracket, the locking pliers will stop the spring, push it outward, and that'll give you space to get the cable right through this opening here. There we go. That's in. Make sure you push it in all the way so it clicks and these tabs lock in. Before I continue, I'm going to use a wire brush and just get all of the debris on this loosened up a little bit. It's not very rusty, but it was quite oily. And there's a lot of gunky oil buildup on the surface of this hub, so I just want to get rid of that so I can have a nice clean surface for my rotor to mount on. If yours was extremely rusty, you're going to want to sand it down with a little sanding disc, but of course don't remove too much material. Hopefully a wire brush is all you're going to need. Once you're done, rinse it with brake parts cleaner. Dry it off with compressed air if you have access to it. I'm going to coat the surface of the hub in anti-seize. I recommend you do this after you clean it, otherwise it's bone dry and it will continue rusting. Try to avoid getting it on the lug studs though. If you do, no big deal, just wipe them off. Wipe these off a little bit, and then we should be all set to finish installing our rotor. Install the rotor. Perfect. Remove your bungee cord now, or whatever you use to support it. Remove the caliper, flip it over and put it on top of the brake rotor. Line it up with the 2 bolts that hold it on. I have my bolts handy, so I can start at least one of them on. Once one is started, you should be able to let go because it'll be held on. That way you can start the other one. Start them by hand so they don't cross thread. Once they're on, tighten them up. The torque for these is 145 foot-pounds. That's torqued. Let's remove the fill plug on the differential, on the back cover here, so that we can actually fill it up. Now you're going to want to use 75 W90 gear oil. And of course, if it's a limited slip, you're going to want to add the limited slip additives. Since we have this off, it's good to double check the magnet on this. This is normal. Don't be alarmed about this. If you see large chunks, then you would want to be concerned about it. But this fine metal debris here is actually normal. To check the level, you could just stick your pinky in there, dip it down. It is actually very close to being full, and it looks like fresh fluid too, so that's a good sign. And obviously, if it's coming out of the fill plug, even after we drained some of the oil through doing our job, this would be overfilled. Since this is not 100% full, you know that it's full when it starts coming out of the fill plug, we're going to add some gear oil. It won't take a lot. The total capacity of this is just over 2.5 quarts, so to top it off, it shouldn't be more than about 1/4 quart. Getting pretty close. You want to make sure you're on level ground for this. If you're not, you will get a false reading. And there we have it. I'm going to add a little more, but it is pretty much, yeah, it's already coming out of the fill plug. So this is when you know that it's full. You want to cap it off. Wipe off any excess that has dripped here. And to tighten this up, you just give it a quick snug. This is bottomed out, about 1/8 of a turn, that's all it takes. Let's get the wheel back on. Put on all 8 of your lug nuts, bottom them out in a cross pattern, and also in a cross pattern, we're going to torque these to 140 foot-pounds. Once again, 140 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. If you want to double check them, go ahead. And now, if your truck still had this lug nut cover, make sure you put it back on. Snap it in place, pump up that brake pedal, and take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.